James, I really appreciate you being here with us today and talking through everything.
Well,
So,
pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.
yeah, well, I would love to kind of touch on what we were just going through, which is what do you feel like got you sort of into this point where you started really diving into the documentary side? And I know you just touched on Spielberg for just a second, but was it that I guess letter back or notion back that, hey, go check out this sighting that sort of was another sort of turning of the page, or what got you into that?
It's really funny actually because growing up, I was born in England. My dad's British. Um, and when my dad dated a British girl for a while, British woman for a while, and her ex-boyfriend was this quite wealthy guy, England. His family owned Yardley's soaps. And he came to America in his early 30s, late 20s, and he didn't really know anybody. And so he would come over. He was also a pilot. He was a great guy. He would come over for like Christmas and Thanksgiving and stuff. And he had this dramatic UFO encounter that he would talk about at the dinner table when I was like, I was like 13, 14, 15. I'd hear it almost every year because everyone's like, "Hey, tell me about your." And I had
Mhm.
absolutely, even though I trusted him and I found him to be a credible person, I just had no interest. I don't know. It just didn't really quite register, whatever. And
Mhm.
then I graduated from high school and I drove across the country. I ended up going to France. I went to Europe and I went with a really good friend from high school, this guy Renee, and we were 18. I think he might have just turned 19. And
Mhm.
we had a great time. We went to London. We bought an old beat up Fiat 131. We drove it to Portugal. I ended up staying on. I got a job and I stayed on, and he went home. He was always complaining. He was like, the portions of food in Europe are so small and so expensive. I'm hungry. I'm always hungry. He was just like, I'm going home. And I was like, yeah, stick it out. No, he wanted to go home. So he went home. We kind of like, as things happen, we kind of just parted ways for a while, didn't see each other for a couple of years. And when I came back to America, I was probably 23
Mhm.
and he was all into UFOs. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm gonna have to cut this guy loose. Like I feel like I just lost one of my best friends. It's
Mhm.
like, and I was really saddened by it because, nobody likes to lose a best friend or see
No.
somebody lose their marbles. It's sad. It's depressing.
Mhm.
And so I was commenting on it at a production facility I was working at. Maybe I was 24. I really can't remember, 23, 24, whatever. And there was a guy named Richard Van Sickle. He was probably 10, 12 years older than me, and he was in production, video production, which I wanted to be involved with. And I had tremendous respect for him. He was a very smart guy, very educated guy, not into the paranormal as far as I knew, not into just like very grounded, pragmatic.
Mhm.
And I brought up to the fact that I was having to cut one of my best friends loose and how saddened by it all I was. And I said he believes like UFO crashed at Roswell and this, that, and the other thing. And Richard looks at me and he goes, "Oh yeah, you didn't hear about Roswell?" I was like, "Well, yeah. I mean, I guess I heard about it, but." He goes, "Oh yeah, the military actually announced that they recovered a flying saucer. That's legit. Like that happened."
Mhm.
And I was like, "Richard, really? And really? You know what I mean? Like, come on,
Like,
really?" I
yeah.
couldn't dismiss him, and so I kind of reluctantly said I'd look into some of this stuff. And I went to a few conferences. I met a few ex-military people.
Mhm.
I actually offered my video services to people that were trying to come forward. Back then, I guess it would be whistleblowers. And the more I dug, the more I realized, oh my God, there's something going on here. There's
Mhm.
something going on. I remember going back to my buddy from England who had had this UFO encounter that I'd heard about when I was 13, 14, 15, whatever. And hey, Michael. He goes, yeah. I go, tell me about that UFO sighting you had again. He goes, well, I've told you a whole bunch of times. What's the sudden interest now? I was like, I want to hear it. What, tell me about it again. Let me
Yeah.
hear this. And what I started to realize is that there was an exhibited technology that, different shapes, sizes, some described as discs, orbs, cigar shape, but the technology was They had the ability to hover. They didn't have any controlled flight surfaces, no like exhaust vents, little to no air disturbance, no sonic boom, right angle
Mhm.
turns at high speeds. They go from a standstill to out of sight in the blink of an eye. I was slowly realizing like somebody has this technology. There's no question about that.
Mhm.
That's irrefutable. Question is who and for how long?
Yeah.
And if it's not the US, and I ended up going to Russia, I went to China, I went to Africa, I went to Australia, I went to South America. I mean, I traveled around the world
Mhm.
asking questions, like, and the phenomenon was global. There was no question about that either.
Yeah.
And, that's how I went into it. And I thought that I would quickly debunk it. And quite the opposite has happened. And not only
Yeah.
that, yeah, sorry. But I was just say that like I'd heard about Rua,
Mm.
this alleged landing case that happened in Rua, Zimbabwe in 1994 at Ariel School. Um, Harare is the capital of Zimbabwe, and it was just I don't know, an hour from Harare, 45 minutes. I've been there. Excuse me. But I'd hear about, alleged landing cases, close encounters of the third kind. That's when witnesses report entities or beings, non-human intelligence connected to the craft. And I remember slowly coming to terms with the fact that the phenomenon was real, UFOs or UAP, craft of unknown origin. I was willing to kind of like swallow that pill, but then when it started getting into entities, beings, aliens, whatever you want to call them,
Mhm.
that was tough for me. And I think it took me a long time. And if you look at the progression of my work before I finally started reporting on aliens,
Yeah.
um, but now I've learned, I'm rambling here, but I've learned to suspend judgment no matter how outlandish, how
Mhm.
crazy some of these accounts can sound, to suspend judgment and listen to the eyewitness testimony and then, draw my own conclusions.
Mhm. What would you say is sort of the distinction between that in any of your films? How much of the weight of what you're going through in writing or you're figuring out the plan for it, how much of it is based off of what you're interpreting from what the witnesses have said or what their testimonies are?
I think one of the reasons why people gravitated towards my films and I developed over a long period of time a good reputation within military communities and civilian people don't generally like to talk about having seen a UFO, particularly if it's, they saw supposedly aliens as well. It's not
Hmm.
exactly a career enhancing move. And people get, the giggle factor, ridicule factor. I mean, some people are like physicists or professors or, whatever. They've got a lot to lose, and coming forward is a big risk, right?
Hmm.
But what I tried to do and still try to do is just provide a credible platform for these witnesses to come forward and tell their story,
Hmm.
and don't try to put a spin on it. Don't try to draw any definitive conclusions, and allow the audience, the viewer, to draw their own conclusions, and I
Hmm.
think that's one of the reasons why my films have been as successful as they are, is because and I it, like I give you an example. When I did the phenomenon was my masterpiece, in my opinion. It's the film that I spent 8 or 9 years on. Uh, and when I finished it, I covered for the first time, I went all in on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right?
Hmm.
And uh, when I finished the film, we were going to get a theatrical release, but then um, COVID hit.
Hmm.
And I just got back from China like a year earlier. I don't know, maybe 9 months or whatever it was. And I
Yeah,
was in
because
touch
the film came out in 2020,
at the end of
correct?
2020, yeah. And I
Hmm.
was in touch with some people in China And they were, because I was like, oh my God, I heard there's rumors of this virus coming. I was like, no. I'm like, no, not now. I just spent almost 9 years making this film. First time in the history of my career, I'm going to get a theatrical release. Like, and now this. Like, I remember my sister calling me and crying over the phone. She goes, it took a global pandemic to stop you. Because I had, but anyway, so we pivoted to Netflix, which ended up, that deal didn't go through because of other issues. But anyway, these executives at Netflix, they're like, yeah, this film's amazing. I had an interview, which I think was the only interview ever with former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid before he was diagnosed with cancer, pancreatic cancer.
Mhm.
And Netflix was going to pick this film up, and their executives were like, hey, yeah, we'd like to, we think it'd be a great idea to get an opposing viewpoint in the Africa case. And I
Hmm.
was like, well, what exactly did you have in mind? They're like, well, we basically want to get someone to say, you know, contrary to what the children and now as adults are saying. And I said, hang on a second. I'm not sure if I'm hearing you right. You're saying that you want me to put the opinion of someone who wasn't there to
Mhm.
say what they saw or they didn't see, who wasn't there. That's what you want me to do? And I said, over my dead body.
Yeah.
I don't care how much money you offer me, that'll never happen because I'm not even going to put in my own opinion. I wasn't
Mm.
there.
Yeah.
And you want me to put someone else who wasn't there? It was just like this case. I was on ABC News Australia. It's a big, network all across Australia. And it was the 60th anniversary of a landing at Westall Primary School. It was a high school in just outside Melbourne,
Mhm.
or maybe a suburb of Melbourne. And a pretty astonishing case. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or not. I featured it,
Yes.
the phenomenon. Yeah. This guy, Shane Ryan, did an extraordinary documentary on that. And I didn't see it, but I participated in it. And I had a number of people contact me and say, yeah, they got this guy talking about all the witnesses haven't seen a weather balloon. I was like, what? Weather balloon? You know, so that's, I haven't seen it yet, but
Mhm.
that's the mentality. People always have to quickly draw the conclusion like either alien or, you know, weather balloon, swamp gas, whatever. What about just allowing a platform for the people that were there to describe what they saw and don't draw any conclusions? How about that?
Yeah. I,
So anyway,
that
that's
that I feel like that's what kind of, for me as a viewer and just coming from a perspective of having never really done any deeper research. I mean, obviously I grew up with films like E.T. and had sort of, that sort of introduction to thinking about the idea, but I'd never really done a lot of research into a particular sighting or a particular case that had happened, and definitely not in another country. And I think that's one of the things that's really interesting about your films is taking the perspective of the witnesses and allowing them to just speak freely about what happened and really sort of going through the different stages of presenting what they're exactly talking about. And there's one particular interview that I remember, this is the one that kept me up at night, was there was I believe it was a general who you had interviewed, and he was all sort of blacked out on the screen, didn't want to reveal his identity, but he was discussing how he was the one who drove the extraterrestrial being to and from the location to their facility. And
yeah.
just absolutely remarkable. I mean, so I gotta ask, I mean, how do you find those people? Do they just come to you, or is it like
Oh my
you show
God.
up?
Okay, so that's the biggest misconception in this type of filmmaking. People think, oh, these people are just throwing themselves at me for their 5 minutes of fame. It couldn't be more the opposite. Better the
Mhm.
witness, the more compelling the case, the less likely they're ever going to want to come forward.
Mhm.
Case in point, we found Military X. We've seen all of his credentials. We knew about him because he gave a statement um, in oh God, it must have been a month or two after the incident happened back in January of 1996. So it must have been February, March, maybe April, May of 1996. And essentially, what they were doing, a handful of firsthand military witnesses had gone on the record to some researchers that if anything happened to them, if they disappeared or they got whatever, that those tapes would be released. So they couldn't kill the story by killing the witness. So
Hmm.
they gave these statements, and those tapes are not to be released for like 30 years, 40 years, whatever the hell it is. I can't remember the date exactly. So we have known about this individual, but couldn't find him or the
Hmm.
others. And when we finally did, it was like, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years before I had the opportunity to just to meet. It was like all the money in the world, never coming forward. Um, it's next to impossible, nearly impossible to get people, although they want to come forward, they want to get the weight of that off their shoulders because you can
Hmm.
imagine what it would be like to harbor that, to have to hold that secret in for all those years. Can you imagine actually, I'm looking at this guy in the eyes in the movie. You in the movie, we had to disguise his voice. We had, but I'm looking this guy in the eyes. And I'm
Yeah.
seeing all his military records and all the trucks that were involved in the transportation of the creature, blah, blah, blah. Um, and I'm thinking, I think I'm looking into the eyes of a guy that drove a bloody alien. And what is it like for you? And I remember asking these people, and I'm sorry if I'm deviating, but I remember asking him, like, what does it feel like in life? What does it feel like walking around with the knowledge that you have,
Hmm.
knowing you see all this speculation, you see all this controversy, you see all this, and yet you know because you did it, you participated. You know that it's real. You know that we're not alone. You've seen it with your own eyes, and yet you have to keep this secret from the rest of the world. What does it feel like? You know?
Yeah.
And it's heavy. It's heavy. I don't know if you saw the latest cut of Moment of Contact, New Revelations.
Yep.
That's the first time in the history of my career, and I've been doing this a long time, that I've actually put in the word alien because I didn't know how, quite honestly, how else to describe it. But it's new revelations, moment of contact, new revelations of alien encounters. And I say alien because it's foreign, right? This being,
Hmm.
this non-human intelligence. But I remember this neurosurgeon, you know, crying on camera. I mean, to see a neurosurgeon cry on camera, and I knew how he felt because I'd seen witnesses like him in the past.
Hmm.
Where it's like you have this weight off your shoulders. Like imagine for 29 years,
Hmm.
you know, having to
That,
keep this huge secret. Like if it's true,
yeah.
that's the biggest story. That's the real life ET, dude. Like you've seen
It's
ET. This is
yeah.
the real life version of that.
And
Like
that's where watching those encounters, how can you not almost sit there and just be like, I just don't understand how the rest of the world isn't like, holy shit. Like, I mean,
because because I'll give you an example of that, and that's another reason why I think that um, just like when Moment of Contact came out in 2022,
mhm,
it didn't get a lot of mainstream attention for a while. People started slowly talking about it. Then Joe Rogan picked up on it, didn't believe it, watched the movie. Holy shit, maybe this really did happen. And it started getting more traction. And then, of course, we had the congressional hearings. I think it's the same thing that's going to happen this time around, that it's the first time in the history of the phenomenon that we have extremely credible firsthand. In fact, we haven't had any firsthand eyewitness testimony like coming forward, not anonymously, but I'm a neurosurgeon. I'm still the leading neurosurgeon. I had face-to-face contact with an alien, a non-human intelligence in captivity. Like that's never happened before.
no.
So I'll tell you, this is just me speculating here,
Mhm,
but I interviewed a bunch of hospice workers about a case that happened in 1997, March 13th. It's commonly referred to as the Phoenix Lights.
mhm.
And you talk to most of the witnesses, and they get frustrated with that name because it wasn't lights, it was a craft, you know. But basically, it's called the Phoenix Lights. But there was a massive boomerang-shaped craft. Even the governor of Arizona saw it. I interviewed him, Fife Symington, and
Mhm.
it was about maybe 2 miles across, and it was like a floating city. And I interviewed a whole bunch of people, but these hospice workers in uh, four, five hospice workers, all women, out in the garden, uh, early evening, late afternoon, early evening, and they said they were all outside having tea,
Hmm.
and they looked up, and there's a spaceship, like a floating city, just floating right over the top of them. Said it took several minutes to pass over them, right? So I'm hearing this story. I mean, I'm talking to these women, these hospice workers, and I'm like, did you stop did you run inside? Did you try to grab a camera? Did you call 911? Did you get in your car and chase like, yeah,
Hmm.
They're all, no, nope. We looked up, we watched it, we
Hmm.
looked back down after a couple minutes and went right back to what we were doing. That was like
How?
so hard for me to imagine. Like, what are you talking about? You didn't go, and at the time, and even still, but at the time, this is probably 20 years ago that I did this interview, 15 at least, could be 20. I couldn't it was inconceivable to me that that could happen, right?
Hmm.
But they couldn't process it. It was like, it's almost, there was no place to categorize this. So they just treated it almost like a non-event. Like they just couldn't fathom, they couldn't wrap their mind around what they just witnessed.
Hmm.
And I don't know, it's almost like amnesia or something. Like and just like crash recovery, live aliens being recovered. I mean, my reaction to specific cases, like my reaction to UFOs, I think it probably took me the better part of a decade to kind of finally go, holy smokes, these things are real. They're probably not us. They're probably not Russia. They're probably not China.
Hmm.
Oh my gosh, what does that leave? Right? Then you get to the entities.
Hmm.
You get to the crash retrieval, you get to the live entities, and that could be a long process to wrap your mind around, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe that's what we're dealing with now with the general population. They're just not ready for this. Hey, man, I've been doing this for a long time, and there are
Hmm.
certain aspects of the phenomenon that has my jaw on the floor.
Yeah.
I hear certain things even today that I
Hmm.
go, if that's true, you got to be kidding me. Like I can almost see justification for the secrecy. Not that I agree with it,
Hmm.
but yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if you saw this, but Representative Tim Burchett came out and was basically quoted in saying, if you knew or saw what I have seen, you wouldn't be able to sleep at night. And I think that's just like after truly having experienced that, like I said, I mean, going through and watching the phenomenon for the first time back in 2022, it was like, whoa, all right, I need to think about this. I really need to, I don't know if I'm going to be able to close my eyes tonight, just thinking about where these things are taking place and how much I don't understand of it. And I wonder with just a big push of disclosure, are we going to hit that point? And I'm just, having gone through and interviewed these people, do you think that a lot of that information is going to come out in the next couple of months or years?
Well, look, so I see a lot online of people feeling very frustrated, like, oh, show me the proof, like blah 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 blah. If I
Hmm.
don't see the alien, forget it. I don't care. Like, show me the spacecraft. Like,
Hmm.
but if you actually seriously think about it, how does the government do it? Like, how do they do it? How do they do it? Okay.
Hmm.
Are you gonna like open up some sort of museum and have like aliens in, floating in, you know, to like liquid tubes or whatever,
Yeah.
and then people can just like file up all 9 billion people on the Earth? Do you
Hmm.
take photographs? Do you invite a panel of international scientists into a lab and expose them to it, and then they come and swear, yes, it exists. I've seen them, or you show photographs or video or film or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, are they going to give up the technology?
Hmm.
Hell no.
No.
That'll never happen. Maybe there's just the admission uh, that the phenomenon is real and we're not alone. We have definitive proof, but then people are going to want to see the proof because the implications. I mean, I don't know what the American population represents in terms of world population. Is it like 4%? I don't even
Hmm.
know, but it's super
No.
small, right?
Hmm.
A couple percent. Um, so if we come out and say something like we have definitive proof that we're not alone, that affects everybody.
Hmm.
Global impact, right? So how do you prove to all these other countries and all these other world leaders that we do have that proof? Does China have that proof? I suspect they do. Does Russia have that truth? I suspect they do. I don't know in terms of, I mean, certainly Brazil and yeah.
Hmm.
Um, but in terms of proving that to the population, do we have to reveal like how successful we've been in reverse engineering it? Could that be an issue of national security? I think it would be.
Hmm.
I don't know. It's a very complex situation. I remember meeting with Robert Bigelow, who's gotten a number of government contracts over the decades. He's had, you know, think tanks, NIDS, where you've got, you know, very prominent people within the scientific community all studying this. He's put a lot of personal money into the thing. And I remember him telling me, probably the better part of 20 years ago,
Hmm.
telling me, I don't know, 17 years ago, whatever it was, that, you know, they're walking among us. Now, I'm not sitting there saying that I believe they're walking among us,
Hmm.
but if that were true, I would imagine that would be a pretty tough. I mean, let's just suspend judgment. Imagine if what he was saying to me was true. Would that be a how do you tell how do you tell
Yeah.
people that? Like people are going to be super paranoid, locking their doors at night. Holy
Yeah.
aliens are walking among us. Like I could see that being a problem. You know,
Hmm.
another thing I've slowly concluded over the years on my own is that the phenomenon itself wants to be somewhat evasive and
Hmm.
not make any sort of definitive moves to unequivocally prove beyond a shadow of doubt that they are here. They do some pretty like bold stuff, you know.
Yeah.
I could give you a number of cases that they've done like wow, okay. But they don't just hover over like the next Super Bowl
Yeah.
or Macy's Day Parade or you know whatever.
Hmm.
They don't do that. So you know
Yeah.
they are in on the secret too. They
Mm.
have an agenda that doesn't necessarily involve exposing their themselves fully.
Mhm.
But they do some bold stuff. You know, they've done some landings. They've done alleged contact. Um, uh, it's it, it's a very complex, you know, issue, and
Mhm.
it's not. Disclosure is like, you know, if you really think about it, and I never really thought about it until the last few years, like how do you go about doing it? And it's tough. Like I remember Hal Puthoff. I don't know if you ever
Mhm.
saw a film I did called
Mhm.
The Program.
Yep.
Hal Puthoff talked about it, that he was actually involved with a panel of people to disclose like how to go, like the pros and cons. And they basically concluded after however long it was, some of the smartest people
Mhm.
can't be done. Not necessarily that it can't be done, but that there were a lot more cons than there were pros, which is
Yeah.
really weird, right?
I mean, like, so the only piece of it that makes sense to me is the technology itself, acknowledging to other countries and basically telling them we have this technology or we've discovered it and we figured out how to reverse engineer it. Full disclosure in that way, I think could be a little detrimental to the positioning of the like country in the grand scheme of everything. Like I feel like that would be a threat. I mean, obviously a threat to a lot of countries, but in terms of just opening up the doors of saying this, yes, like this is the government saying this is 100% here, but not having to touch on the technological side of it.
Well, okay, so let's just say that does happen, okay?
Hmm.
Guess what? The floodgates are going to open. They're going to demand more answers.
Hmm.
They're going to have a lot more questions, the world, than we have answers.
Yeah.
Now, by exposing what you know, you're going to also have to expose all the things that you don't know. And that's going to
Hmm.
create even more fear.
Hmm.
Imagine, imagine if they don't understand their origins and intent. Imagine if they don't.
Yeah.
So they're going to say, yeah, they're here. We are their petri dish, or we are their experiment, or they are monitoring our progress. They interfere here, they interfere there, but overall, they don't make their presence overtly known.
Hmm.
We don't know who they are, where they come from, what they want. I mean, that scared the shit out of people.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. I really don't know. The other night I was talking with some guy at the DIA that I mean, he could have been full of doggy doo doo, but I don't think he was. And he certainly comes across as someone that would be in a position to know.
Hmm.
And I was, slowly trying to pry information out of him. He was very, very guarded, but I was slowly just working my magic or lack thereof. But I was trying to, he knew who I was. I
Hmm.
was, I wanted to know like how many people he anticipated had like the bigger picture.
Hmm.
And and he's like, probably 10. I said,
Hmm.
you're telling me that 10 people on the entire planet have the bigger picture? He goes, not the full picture, but yeah, it's definitely the bigger picture. 10 people? Really? 10? That's really what? And I said, well, where would you consider you on that scale? He
Hmm.
goes, "Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure he said one of 30. I was like, so you're one of 30 people on planet Earth. Yeah. Hmm. And I remember saying, I think I said about Hal and Eric Davis, and I think they fell into the 50 or 100. And Hal told me, he's like, I've told you this much. I know this much. I'm like, Jesus, Hal, like, my God, you know?
Hmm.
Uh, so, and if this guy's telling me the truth, and if he really does know and it's accurate, then that would mean that only 10 people on the entire planet have the bigger picture. It doesn't mean they have the biggest picture. And then I said, this is all kind of talking about, disclosure and like how to
Hmm.
process all this stuff. Um, I heard it's a little scary
Hmm.
because I have, but I don't know how scary. I don't know. I don't know. And he goes, yeah, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, how can you see that? Like, tell me more. Don't just drop that on me. No. And we were both sipping on a whiskey. And I said, well, um, like how scary, how? Like how's it? And he goes, well, you don't need to be scared of your own secure, safety, whatever. You don't need to worry. It's not, no. I was like, well, I wasn't really worried about my personal. I was like, how, but it's scary, like how. And he goes, intent, intent. That's a little scary.
Yeah.
So I was just about to say, like, obviously, like this is the moment I've been, you have to remember, like, not do I just make documentaries. I don't, I'm doing this because I'm really curious.
Hmm.
I want to know. I'm
Yeah.
curious. I like to figure things out. I like to like get to the bottom of things. So it's not even about like making document. I mean, I just happen to share what my personal investigations with the general public because I document it, right? And that
Hmm.
enables me to keep doing more of it because I can share it. People can help support what I'm doing. And but I never did it for the money. It was never about the money for me, ever. And so I just want to know. So I'm thinking like, Jesus, after 30 plus years, I'm finally going to get like some more answers. So now I'm going to go all in. Like, what's the intent as far as we know?
Hmm.
Just as I was about to get that question out, somebody just butts in at the cocktail party. It was like post screening of Age of Disclosure, and somebody just butts in. Hey, I've been dying to meet you. It was like, oh my God. So now I'm left hanging. So I don't know. Now it's going to be to be continued, We'll see.
Yeah.
But
That's
I don't know, man. I wish, a lot of people look at me like I've got answers, and unfortunately I don't.
yeah, I mean,
I wish I did.
looking, yeah, I feel like most at this point in time, we've hit this point where, at least from my perspective, the topic has become less like I would almost say not at all fringe in government to talk
Yeah.
about.
Oh yeah.
I mean, people like Representative Tim Burchett, Anna Paulina Luna, Eric Burleson, they are really sort of leading this charge into now, okay, we want everything to come out and we're gonna, drop little hints here and there until it eventually comes out, or we're gonna, apply the proper pressure. But how much of that, from your perspective and sort of like having spoken with other government officials in the past, do you feel like it's from a place of proper understanding, or do you feel like it's from a place of this is a really popular topic, let me push for this and try and get it, and it will raise my the amount of
Both,
people that like me?
both.
Hmm.
Yeah, both. I remember interviewing, thanks to Don Schmidt, interviewing the former governor Richard. Oh, his last name will come to me in a second, but Bill Richardson. He was the governor of New Mexico. He was also part of the Department of Energy during the Clinton administration. He just passed a couple years ago, but he told me, he was, yeah, I was curious. I was the governor of Arizona. I mean, I was governor of New Mexico. We had the UFO crash evidently in New Mexico in 47. And he was like, I thought I had some clout. I got a little power.
Hmm.
Started making inquiries, and they were just like, talk to the hand, to the
Hmm.
governor. But he goes, to my amazement, even the people that didn't like me on the other side of the fence of the aisle, they were all fully supportive. I got more support from both parties, Democrats, Republicans. He goes, it was unbelievable. It was like the only topic that I could talk about that everyone's all, yeah. And
Yeah.
politicians are starting to see that. And one of the statements by that I didn't use in the phenomenon, I have put it out since then. In fact, it might be in the latest cut of Moment of Contact, New Revelations, where I put in the out credits, I believe, I put former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid in there, where he says, "Look, I said to him at the time, like, what would you say to the President of the United States, no matter who it was?"
Hmm.
And he goes, "Don't be afraid of this topic. Lean into it. People want to know. This
Yeah.
transcends politics. Like, you think it's going to be damaging to your political career? It won't be.
Hmm.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Like you can talk about this stuff openly and not be laughed at out of the room like you were. Like I remember interviewing this councilwoman, Frances Barwood, back in the 90s after we had this dramatic UFO sighting over the state of Arizona. I mean, it was like, Jesus, so many
Hmm.
people saw this thing. All she said at the time, as a councilwoman, Frances Barwood, all she said was, let's have an investigation. Let's try to give our, you know, citizens, our, people living in the state of Arizona some answers.
Hmm.
And she was lambasted. Oh my Lord, you could look it up online. They roasted her.
Yeah.
All she said was, she didn't say aliens have landed. She didn't say anything. She just said, let's investigate. That was it. You wouldn't believe it. Poor thing. I felt so bad.
Hmm.
That's not the case anymore. It's not the case anymore.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I feel like even over the last year, just the transition of everything that's happened. I feel like it's happened in really the last couple of years that people have started to sort of turn a new leaf, and having the conversation openly isn't something where, just like you said, you're laughed at or you're ridiculed for it. I remember I had a conversation with Representative Eric Burleson, and we were talking about how a couple years ago he was on a podcast talking about it and just sort of going through it as he was initially put on the oversight committee, and his local paper wrote about him and was like, I can't believe he's doing this, talking about this, yada, yada, yada. And now that's not the case anymore. I mean, he's
Hmm.
on podcasts, he's on interviews all the time now, having
Yeah.
conversations. And one of the things that I would be really curious to know is you've been to all of these different countries and had conversations with people that are in government, people that were involved in the military, that are currently involved in the military in these other countries. What's the difference in the perspective of talking about this openly? Is it every country's different, or there's pretty much a unified front of being a little bit sort of cautious, but also behind closed doors open?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples. I arrived in Russia in the 90s, late 90s, and the first interview, one of the first big interviews I interviewed Pavel Popovich, who was a cosmonaut. It's a Russian astronaut, and then I interviewed an admiral, a retired admiral, and he said through my interpreter, if you're here to talk about whether UFOs exist or don't exist, and I'll remind your audience, this was in the late 90s. The door's over there. In other words, that is an indication to me that you haven't done your homework. We're here to talk about the implications and a possible, exchange of information on an international level. That's what they were interested in doing with the Americans on the phenomenon, right? I
Hmm.
went in the mid 90s and I interviewed people. I think I went to the Belgian Air Force, and they were like, "Oh yeah, there's an arm SOBEPS. I don't remember. It's an acronym. I can't remember what it stands for. SOBEBS or something." And they sent me over to an agency, and they didn't say like, "Oh, UFOs, you're out of your mind." No, not at all. A landing case in England. Uh, MOD started opening up their files, releasing stuff back in 2007, 2008. Uh, South America, I interviewed some generals there, Brazilian Air Force general and Brazilian Army general, talking about over 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, talking about the phenomenon. It was absolutely real. Like, so my personal experience from other countries, I think America's got a lot more to hide, but they were very much more open way before America was,
Yeah.
no? But now America's almost leading the way.
Hmm.
With Dave Grush. I mean, who would have thought when I put out Moment of Contact in 2022, I had a lot of people looking at me going, "Man, you're coming off the heels of this incredible documentary that you did. First time probably in the history of the phenomenon where you've managed to get not just mainstream household names on camera, but people endorsing a film dealing with reporting on close encounters of the third kind." I mean,
Hmm.
that's a big deal, right? And now
Yeah.
you do a documentary on an alleged UFO crash with live aliens walking through the town in Brazil. Like, are you sure you want to do that to your reputation? Like, are you? And they were right. In some respects, they were right. But I was like, well, I've been doing it. I've been going back and forth, and I feel confident that
Hmm.
this happened, so I'm going to report on it. But I never anticipated, like less than a year later, we'd have open congressional hearing where there's a high-level intelligence officer testifying under oath that there's a crash retrieval program in biological. I did not see that one coming.
Yeah.
It was welcome,
Yeah.
you know. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I would say that America's probably leading the way at this point. But
Hmm.
in my personal experience, I was shocked at how open. I mean, I interviewed what was the uh, I'm trying to think of the name of the equivalent of the space program over in France. There was an arm of Centre National d'Études Spatiales. It was Centre National CNES.
Hmm.
I did that for a film I did almost 20 years ago. God, incredible. Um, and they talked openly about the existence. I had to get I put in an official request. I had to get an approval from a wing of I don't know if it was the military or the French government, but I got access to, official scientists and people that were involved in the program talking about
Hmm.
you could check it out. Your audience could check it out for free. I did a film called I Know What I Saw, but that was 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And they were talking about the existence of the phenomenon.
Hmm.
So America was behind and now they're in front.
I mean, and after that congressional hearing, I feel like that's what really sprung everybody into
Well,
action.
Well, after the 2017 New York Times article that Leslie Kean, Helene Cooper, and Ralph Blumenthal did
Hmm.
that exposed a previously classified, I guess, secret UFO program or whatever, you know, OSAP, ATIP, whatever.
Hmm.
That's when it really hit hard because then Senator Harry Reid in my time, like he's a household name. He was the
Yeah.
Senate Majority Leader. Like he'd be like the equivalent of like a Chuck Schumer today. Like
Hmm.
everyone knew whether you liked him or hated him, everyone knew who Senator Reid was. I
Hmm.
mean, and for him to come on, not anonymously, but yeah, we launched this program 10 years ago. It's true, blah, blah, blah. The government's hiding stuff. Like that was a big deal.
Yeah.
That was a big deal. Like I remember people contacting me that previously thought I was nuts. And I was 4 years, probably 4 or 5 years into making the phenomenon when that happened. I never
Hmm.
saw that one coming. I mean, talk about lucky. Got to ride that wave, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I went back to the drawing board and had to raise more money to finish, to incorporate that aspect of the story into the thing. But
Hmm.
um, anyway, yeah, it's and now we don't know where the hell we're going.
Yeah.
We're in
Yeah.
uncharted territory.
What's it's going to be a crazy, like, that's where I think it's going to get really insane is you have President Trump basically coming out and being like, "We'll release it. We'll talk about it. We'll let everybody know what's going on." And then now you have this incredible surge from all of these politicians being like, "It's happening. Like it's gonna come out." And I remember there's this actually, it's a hilarious clip that came from our last episode was with Eric Burleson, and we were sitting there talking about this unknown object in an undisclosed location that was too big to move, so they built a building around it. And he
Yeah,
wouldn't
in
say
South Korea, right? Yeah,
South
South Korea.
Korea,
Yeah.
and he wouldn't say like where it was from or where it was or anything. And he went on, I believe it was Newsweek, a week after the episode came out, and he was on there with Greer, and they were talking about it. And he said the same thing he told us. He goes, "I can't disclose. I can't tell you all where it is. That's classified information." And Greer goes, "It's in South Korea." It was
Yeah.
just,
Uh-huh.
it was hilarious just seeing that. But I mean, at this point, I'm just curious, like what's next on the list for different documentaries that you want to come out with, and how are you sort of deciding the next things that you want to be working on with everything that's going on? Are you thinking, I want to do something here and looking at what's happening in the US and the level of disclosure, or other places?
I think we're at the point now where while I'm still working on, I'm doing a documentary, which I filmed a lot of it already, on the event I did to the National Press Club in January. Your audience can check it out on News Nation covered it live. But I did this event where I flew in witnesses from an alleged UFO crash retrieval case that involved the
Hmm.
Americans, Brazil, um, at the National Press Club. Burleson spoke. We had a senator from Brazil spoke. I'm going to do a piece about that. But I also feel like, you know, things are moving so quickly right now that it's more than a documentary because the documentary, even if you move really quickly, it's going to be a year from when you film to when you release,
Yeah.
8 months, whatever. Um, so I'm working on other avenues I'm thinking about working, well, I'm not thinking about, I'm not, I can't really announce what I'm doing right now, but
Hmm.
engaging the executive branch immediately
Hmm.
on taking the necessary steps
Hmm.
to declassify specific things, to get legislation passed, to protect whistleblowers, this kind of thing.
Hmm. Yeah, and if you were to look back at everything that you've learned and everything that all the information that you've been able to put into these films, things that you've kept from them, is there anything that you've ever kept from the film where you're just like, all right, that I don't know if
Yes.
we want to launch that.
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Just because Men in Black, I avoided
Hmm.
them like the plague for the first probably better part of 20 years of my career.
Yeah.
Heard a bunch of stories, you know, and I was
Hmm.
like, yeah, come on, man. Like these guys in suits, you know,
Hmm.
come on. And then I heard it, and then I heard it, and then I heard it, and I heard it, and I heard it, and I heard it, and I heard it. And then finally I heard it in South America, and I was like, oh my gosh, here we go again. All right, these guys are real. And I went all in on it. But things like that, you
Have,
know, telepathic communication with witnesses, some of them commercial airline pilots,
hmm
uh, like, and they understood when they looked at me and reluctantly shared that aspect of their encounter with me. They
hmm
understood like how crazy it sounded. And I would generally avoid probably reporting on some of those things, you know, just
have
because
you,
I know how my reaction is to it. And I'm trying to make this digestible to a more mainstream, broader audience, just, bite-sized chunks kind of thing.
hmm have you ever had anybody from the government come to you and be like,
Yes.
that's not going out?
Not no, but uh I've been meeting with people in the various agencies in the last couple
Hmm.
of years. Yes. And they
Yeah.
know what I'm up to, and we've talked. I've been into a
hmm
skiff, talked about disclosure, talked about the complexities of disclosure, talked about like exchange of information, limited. If there's any witnesses that need protection to bring to them, I don't know if I trust them. I haven't done that yet, but that's certainly on the table.
hmm
Never thought I'd be hearing myself say that.